Okay, everybody, let's talk about community policing. Here's the learning points for you. The first thing I want you to make sure you walk away with from this is the idea of the three P's. We talked about the three R's when we talked about professional model of policing. And the three P's, we're looking at problem solving, partnerships, and crime prevention. Within that concept of problem solving is the hope that the community and the police can get together, identify priorities within the community, and then can come up with a game plan to deal with that problem. The linchpin of problem solving is the concept of SARA, the scanning, analysis, response, and assessment. And that can come from many different factors. Hopefully, when officers are faced with, repetitive problems, they look at the problem, try to figure out what the root cause is, how they can better impact that, and what can they do to respond within that. Analysis can be whether it can be from looking at the surroundings, looking at the geography. The response can be the idea of how do you, what kind of things can you do? Because the bottom line with cops, what they mostly do, you throw men or officers and money at a problem. By money I mean overtime, and that can be successful or perhaps not. And then the next thing that in SARA is assessment. Cops are terrible at assessment. They're great in identifying a problem. They're great in coming up with a response. Once the response is done, then problem solved. And they seldom go back and look at crime statistics or input from the community to see if they've really impacted that. The next learning point is, where did COP come from? And the really important part that I want you to get from this is COP did not come from the police. Managers weren't sitting around, or police executives, and said, boy, what can we do to make ourselves more available to the public? What happened is after the riots of the 60s, the late 60s, academics began to really examine policing. And community policing actually came from the academic world. Kelling and Wilson, both Harvard professors, work at the Kennedy School of Government. They came up with the concept of broken windows, and they had an article in New Yorker magazine, I think, on the broken windows theory. That deals a bit with that community engagement or community ownership, the contagion theories, and how how communities become unsettled and disorganized is the term. That's the term, the key term, disorganized. So that's the second learning point. The third learning point is the development of COP in law enforcement. Once police managers and executives knew that this was coming down the pipe, no matter what they wanted to do or say about it, they needed to try to convert officers to it. And officers were told this is a department-wide philosophical change, and management will change. And some things that did happen were agencies went from what's known as a very tall organization. You had chief, you had a series of of managers, then middle managers, supervisors, officers. Information flowed down from the chief or the other managers on down to the department. And the concept was that they didn't do well in as far as organization and communication. So what COP sought to do was to flatten the organization. We talked about that in earlier chapters. A flat organization with fewer middle managers, a chief, some level of upper management, a thin layer of middle management, and then supervisors and officers with information supposedly going up and down. At least that was the concept. Um, Unfortunately, COP was really viewed a lot by rank and file as being soft on crime. That you're not out trying to find criminals and make arrests. You're out, you drop that objective measure of performance in citations, arrests, field contacts, and you replace it with these, meetings with the public. Well, truth be told, as community policing sits today, you don't see a tremendous level of police going out and getting together a bunch of citizens and then pursuing a problem. That usually happens, unfortunately, after there's a significant problem within the community. And it doesn't, this meeting to make changes or to problem solve doesn't really happen to the way that it would have been like we would have liked to have seen with community policing. Third thing, let's talk about the idea of partnerships. Talked about problem solving, let's talk about partnerships. And partnerships was, I don't hate to say it because it sounds so cynical, but was sold to the rank and file as developing relationships with individual people in the field. Well, unless you work in an environment where you have the ability to go out and go on foot patrol, whether that's from low calls for service, lots of officers, or an area which is best controlled by, best patrolled by foot beats, then yeah, that's going to be really difficult. Look at, probably the prime example here would be, look at the areas surrounding Cal State Long Beach, not the campus itself. The campus itself, for the police department, sets up really well for foot beats. However, where do you see officers most frequently? Driving around cars. Now, a lot of that can be from, there's a tendency of academics to think that seeing a police officer stifles imagination and makes people fearful and such. So you can see where there's a natural discussion point between community policing and and the public. So around the campus, mostly residential area, almost a suburban kind of residential area, terribly unproductive for foot patrol. Just too much area, too few officers. Now, if you go down like Pine Street, that's a pretty decent area for foot patrols. Officers can get to know the merchants, the restaurateurs, the bar patrons, owners, and they can make a real impact in that area just because of the way the area is laid out. So partnerships then morphed into the concept of upper management developing relationships with large, I hate to use the term, stakeholders within the community. Usually people, large-scale business owners, large-scale employers. And that's where, unfortunately, a lot of political power is held within a city. Now, when you start talking about political power, developing a relationship with it, and the police, hopefully that makes you start to ponder, are we looking at a return to to the vestiges of the political era? Is there the possibility that we might see more of those kind of things? And that's a pretty deep thought kind of an issue that you can look at. The third of the three P's and the next learning point is crime prevention. Crime prevention is a linchpin of community policing, the three P's. However, day-to-day cops, street cops, don't go out looking to do crime prevention type activities. They're not necessarily going to schools and talking to teachers or children about how to handle, God forbid, active shooters. That's usually done by upper management with the school under very close supervision so that the wrong word, wrong message doesn't get out to the public, or the wrong perceived message. CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design, CPTED, that's a kind of a big deal. But if you can look at it on one scale, where you have areas that at nighttime are well lit. There's not a lot of escape routes for for bad guys. It's open areas that can be seen which will keep crime down, and little CPTED things. There's I don't know how you see them appear, but in Orange County we used to see a lot of banks and grocery stores, and those are getting robbed left and right. And part of the reason was you had so many people going in and out. Bad guy could walk up, I've got a gun, give me your money, get the money, walk out the door, and then he's in a parking lot with a whole bunch of other people. It may be difficult to follow, and you could park a car in the general area, really close, get in that car, go to a second car, and then you're gone. So we started to see CPTED and fewer banks inside of grocery stores. But down here in San Diego, I still see that more frequently than I did in Orange County the last few years that I was up there. Last learning point, effectiveness. And this is what I want you to think about. Has community policing been effective? Look at Ferguson. Look at any of the Baltimore. Look at any of those controversial situations. Hasn't that been the public perception or the media approach? Hasn't that been put on the police throughout the country, that all the police act in this particular fashion, regardless of whether or not that perception is true? The hands up, don't shoot after Ferguson, well, that became a catchphrase, but it wasn't true. So how effective has that relationship been with the police? It's a really interesting question, especially when you deal with the high crime area. Because who commits the crime? People who live in that community. It's not a tremendous amount of people from the outside coming in. It's those that live in that area, doing the burglaries, doing the robberies, bringing in drugs, selling drugs, prostitution. That happens within the community and is much more difficult to deal with, because the cops are arresting the relatives, neighbors, and friends of other people in the community. That's one thing that I don't see a lot of discussion on when it comes to gang involvement, but that's a critical piece of it. And how much, not the community from being afraid, because that's a definite component, but the community from not wanting to give up on their friends. kind of an interesting deal. So, community policing in a nutshell. Hopefully we will have a good week, and I will see